I'm Mr. Black, and in this video I'm going to be discussing people who slipped into parallel worlds. In 1984, the Milwaukee Journal reported the bizarre story of Doris Klagstead, a woman who claims that, for a brief moment, she stepped into another world. Doris was hiking in a wooded area near Burlington, Wisconsin, which happened to be located near a number of ancient Native American burial mounds. It was near one of these mounds that Doris was walking with her dog when she felt a sudden blurring, after which she began to experience a feeling of intense bliss, followed by a feeling of disorientation. When she was able to finally clear her head and get her bearings, she looked around and discovered that she was somewhere else. I was in an entirely different place. I mean, really different. All around me were trees that had pitch black trunks with dark purple leaves. But the leaves were strange, like stringy fronds, she told the newspaper. As she looked around, she noted that the sky was, quote, dark umber red, and the ground beneath her was exceedingly odd, as if she were standing on a thick layer of spongy moss. I should have been frightened out of my mind, but I was just completely overwhelmed with a feeling of total happiness. I felt as if a wind of joy was blowing against my body, penetrating my very being and passing right through me. I felt as if every pain and anxiety I have ever carried with me was being washed away. As Doris took in her environment, she became aware of the sound of the barking of her dog. She looked in the direction of the barks and could see her Australian shepherd running back and forth frantically, quote, as if it were outside a bubble, trying to get in. It was as if whatever portal or doorway she had accidentally stumbled through, her dog was not able to follow her. The dog, though, seemed to sense where she had gone and was trying frantically to run to be with her. I walked toward my dog, and when I got close, I reached out to touch him. The moment her hand made contact with her dog's fur coat, the entire experience collapsed, and she found herself back in the Wisconsin woods. She looked around and saw that things were back to normal. She was now surrounded by green trees, green grass, and blue skies, and there was now gravel under her feet. I can't say how long the experience lasted. It might have been minutes, it might have been hours. I just know it happened, and no, I wasn't smoking pot or taking hallucinogenic mushrooms, even though that would make more sense to me. All I know is that I somehow stepped into another world for a short time, and thanks to my dog, I got back out. Neston, Liverpool, England, September 1974. Sandra Williams, 24, and her best friend Jill Brixham headed out for a night of dancing at a local discotheque called Miranda's, over in the Leighton Court Country Club. Their friend Andy had picked them up. They arrived there at around 9 p.m. Andy reminded them that he had to work the next day and that they would have to be out of there by 1 a.m. Along with a disco, the club also had 3 bars and a restaurant. The DJ that night was Pete Price, a regular DJ at Radio Merseyside. The floor of the discotheque was packed, and by 10 p.m., a friend of Jill's, a 22-year-old blonde from West Kirby named Shelley, arrived, and soon the girls were dancing together to the Osmonds and other popular bands of that era. At this time, Sandra took notice of a guy on the dance floor. She had a crush on a TV presenter named Mike Smith, who hosted a do-it-yourself program called Jobs Around the House, and this fellow, whoever he was the spitting image of him. Sandra decided to introduce herself. As she danced her way over to him, a man in his 40s stepped in front of her, blocking her way. When he finally moved aside, almost in a huff, Sandra continued across the floor towards the Mike Smith look-alike. Then something very strange happened. Jill, who had been watching Sandra from across the dance floor, claims that her friend seemed to vanish in the haze of the flashing multicolored lights. It was so odd that Jill stopped dancing and rushed over to Shelley to tell her what had just happened. The two girls made their way over to where Sandra was last seen, but they could not find her. Sensing something wasn't right, the girls searched the toilets, the 3 bars, and the restaurant, but there was no sign of Sandra. They returned to the discotheque where Jill suggested that they call the police. Around this time, Shelley noticed Sandra standing in the crowd of dancers. She appeared to be in a daze, and her black, low-cut top was sitting messily on her shoulders. The first thing that Jill and Shelley thought was that somebody had assaulted their friend, and they rushed over to her. They headed straight to the bathroom to check out Sandra and find out what had happened to her and where she had been for the past 15 minutes. Sandra proceeded to relate a chilling story. She claims that she was making her way over to the man when everything changed around her. The surroundings changed, the music changed, the people around her changed. It was like she had stepped through a doorway into another world. The music was now deafening and hard to describe. To her, it was almost futuristic sounding and noisy. She likened it to a recording of somebody making a racket. Blinding beams of light shone everywhere, and in the haze of darkness just outside the light were strange people surrounding her. They were naked and dancing in weird, jerky movements to a deep, thumping beat. Some of these people were covered in odd-looking tattoos, and some wore bizarre masks with long noses. A naked man with blue and gold-streaked hair and yellow nail polish made very suggestive dancing movements towards her and even attempted to pull off her clothes. Terrified, Sandra punched him. This figure recoiled backwards in horror, felt his face where Sandra had struck him, and seemed near tears. The music eventually became so loud and unbearable that Sandra had to put her hands over her ears. She claims that it felt as though her skull was vibrating. She then watched as 3 nude men, holding hands, began to float slowly upwards into the air as all sorts of colored geometric shapes flashed over their bodies. She felt something prod her from behind and turned to see a heavily tattooed man on all fours, poking her from behind with his long, phallic, false nose. Something about this man truly frightened her, and she began to run. As she ran, it soon became apparent to her that she was no longer in Miranda's nightclub. She had no idea where she was. Weird, sparkling 5-pointed stars and other geometric shapes floated past her in midair, apparently projected from a huge, silvery globe which rotated on the ceiling. This globe was also the source of the high-powered, narrow beams of rainbow light which flashed over everyone. Sandra began to panic, and she closed her eyes. She opened them again, and to her horror, the strange naked dancers were still there. Sandra then felt her stomach begin to turn over. She could only liken it to the sensation of how it feels when you descend quickly on a roller coaster ride at the fair. Then, suddenly, she found herself surrounded by music she recognized, and she saw that the people dancing around her appeared dressed, and she recognized the clothing. Somehow, she was back in the club, back in Miranda's, though she didn't know how. Sandra and the girls were at a complete loss to explain what had happened that night, though it appears, for a brief moment, Sandra had been transported to a strange world, one similar but different than ours. I have to wonder, when I read it, the man that stepped in front of the Sandra, the 40-year-old man, I have to wonder if he was trying to protect her. That's the sense I got from it. You know, maybe this guy was there trying to stop her because he knew what was going to happen if she kept moving towards that guy. But she, of course, wasn't having it, and there was nothing he could do, so he backed off, and then she proceeded to have this experience. Kind of makes you wonder, what was he, like a guardian angel? Was he possibly a man in black who was, kind of trying to interfere? It kind of makes you wonder. It's fun to think about too.